Welcome to the National Tally Room in Canberra for Australia Votes 2010, where we're ready to take you for a fascinating ride on what will be a nerve-wracking night for Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott and all their supporters. A night that one way or another is going to make history. We could even see the first hung parliament in 70 years. It's been a tumultuous 3 years, the end of the Howard era, the spectacular rise and fall of Kevin Rudd, the worst global recession in 75 years and near collapse of the world's financial system, the rise of Australia's first female Prime Minister and the ups and downs of 3 opposition leaders. Brendan Nelson's Liberal leadership does seem a long time ago now. This has been a wearing campaign of changing fortunes, with dramatically different stories in different states, and the latest public polling as well as the party's own private polling showing Labor in trouble, particularly in Queensland and New South Wales. And we're well set up to tell you the various stories as they unfold, fast and accurate. We've got Anthony Green's magical computer analysis, Stephen Smith and Nick Minchin, 2 of the sharpest analytical minds in politics when it comes to election counts. Tony Jones will chair a second expert panel with Penny Wong and George Brandis. And Lee Sales will keep you up to date with the big picture as the pattern of tonight's count takes shape. We'll also be crossing to crucial seats around the nation for insights on the ground. This is going to be quite a night. Just consider the import of today's published polls. Newspoll in the Australian, Nielsen in the Melbourne Age and Sydney Morning Herald. Both have Labor ahead in 2-party preferred terms, 50.2% with Newspoll, 52% with Nielsen. But a state-by-state breakdown of Newspoll's figures represent a nightmare for Labor, showing swings to Tony Abbott's coalition of 7.6% in Queensland and 6.2% in New South Wales. Theoretically, that alone would put 21 Labor seats at risk in those 2 states if the swing was uniform, and that's a big if. And Labor can only afford to lose 12 before its majority is gone. Anthony Green, can we use your chamber graphic to explain how the Parliament looked before today's vote, adjusted for the various redistributions?
Well, our starting point for tonight is that we say that Labor has 88 seats going into this election. That's taking account of the redistribution. 5 coalition seats have notionally become Labor held. There's 59 for the Liberal and National Party. With the formation of the LNP in Queensland, we've amalgamated the Liberals and Nationals for this election, and they'll be shown that way all evening. There's no Greens. Potentially they could gain some in this election, and 3 others. OK, now the potential Green seat and the 3 others, we could well be looking at a hung parliament. It could be one of several combinations. Yeah. You need 76 seats for a party, one side of politics, to be confident of governing in their own right. If you get 75, it's a tie. 74, you're a seat short of a majority. Both sides could end up with 73 or 74 seats with a balance of power in the middle there. Then there'd be negotiation. It's going to be, if it's that close, then we won't know that result tonight. That'll take several days of counting.
We most certainly won't. Stephen Smith, this is a nail-biting situation for you, and I would suggest there probably isn't a person in Australia who really knows the outcome tonight, but give us your best guess.
Well, at about this time in the last election, my best guess to Tony Jones before 6:30 was a Labor win, but it'll take me much longer than that tonight, if indeed there's a result tonight. I think anyone who tells you they can predict the outcome doesn't know. We will get down to 30 or more marginal seats throughout the country, the bulk of those in New South Wales and Queensland. That is where the election will be decided. I can find 60 seats which I think Labor will win. It's very difficult to find the next 16 that we need for a majority, and a lot will depend upon how the battle has gone on the ground. I think local incumbency will be a factor, but as Anthony has pointed out, we have 5 notional seats where a redistribution has given us a seat on paper, but where you have Liberal members, and where they dig in effectively, it's hard to toss them. OK. Nick Minchin, you've travelled around with Tony Abbott on this campaign, so you've seen a lot of it. I mean, in fact, it must have been a whirlwind at times. Yeah. So what's your feeling?
Well, the only prediction I feel confident of making, Kerry, is that Stephen Smith will no longer be Australia's Foreign Minister after tonight's election, because either we win and Julie Bishop becomes Foreign Minister, or Labor win and, unfortunately for Stephen's sake, Kevin Rudd becomes the Foreign Minister. But
I'm not sure that's actually a foregone conclusion.
Very tough on Stephen, but well, clearly some sort of deal was done with Kevin Rudd.
I was under the impression we're here as analysts. He's rerunning the campaign.
OK, campaign's over.
Campaign's over.
Can you win
look,
tonight?
I agree with Stephen. I can't call it. It's one of the first elections I feel that I don't have enough capacity to call it tonight. There's a lot of voters have left at the last minute, a lot of seats that are, really marginal. You've had the redistribution has really made this a very difficult election to predict. I still think and have thought all the way through that for us to win 17 net additional seats is a very, very tough ask, but it's possible. But I won't be surprised at all if we don't have a result tonight, Kerry.
The South Australian election earlier this year is still fresh in my mind, where it looked from the news poll going into the Saturday that Labor had lost that election.
Yeah.
In fact, they got, as news polls suggested, only 48% of the two-party preferred vote, but because of their marginal seat campaigns, because they'd quarantined enough seats, they actually won.
Yep.
Now, do you see potential parallels here?
Well, as a South Australian, I'm very sensitive to that phenomenon, the capacity of Labor particularly to, as we say, sandbag its own seats with incumbent members, and incumbency is now a very powerful weapon. And obviously, as a Liberal, I fear that phenomenon again tonight, although there are a number of seats that are on the Labor list, of course, where they don't have incumbents. And that will be a problem for Labor tonight.
Well, lots of swirls and eddies, and there's going to be plenty for us to talk about. Julia Gillard is watching the count tonight from her home base in Melbourne. Labor has set up its headquarters at the Melbourne Conference and Exhibition Centre. Chris Uhlmann is there, and he joins me now. So, Chris, what intelligence have you picked up about the tensions behind the scenes at Labor headquarters, and whether there is any sense of confidence at all?
Well, I'd say the mood is anxious at the moment, which is better than yesterday, because yesterday it was despondent and despairing, Kerry. Interestingly, the Labor Party kept its tracking polling going until last night, and when they went to bed last night, there were 10 seats that were 50-50. So that's how close it is, and depending on how those seats fall, of course, if they all fall one way, it might not look so close in the end, but it certainly is. So the mood that I've picked up in the camp is that everyone is anxious, but that's not just here, that's the mood across both parties at the moment. And as your panel says, everyone's of the same mind. No one can call this, although there are some on the Liberal Party side who believe they'll fall just short.
Now, Julia Gillard, of course, like Tony Abbott, will make an appearance at some stage tonight, but it's absolutely in the lap of the gods as to whether she will be either claiming victory or conceding defeat. So it could be quite late before we see her.
Absolutely. She has been here, Kerry. Apparently she dropped in briefly. She's staying at a hotel nearby, so she came through the convention centre a little bit earlier on. Of course, the detail's been here, but now she's gone back to her hotel. Now, she will be in the convention centre, we understand, from around about 7 p.m. this evening, but it may not be until very late in the night, indeed, until we see her, and it'll be interesting to know whether or not she will be claiming victory, conceding defeat, or saying, let's wait and see.
Well, we can have some fun with the figures in the meantime. A lot hanging on this nonetheless. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks,
and having fought an incredible campaign, the marathon man Tony Abbott is in Sydney tonight. He'll face his moment of truth at Liberal Party headquarters at the Four Seasons Hotel. And Mark Simpkin is standing by there now. Mark, again, what's the mood behind the scenes? I mean, traditionally at this time of the night, there's not much action at headquarters, but behind the scenes, I'm quite sure there's a lot of nail-biting going on.
I don't think there would be any nails left tonight, even this early, Kerry. They're not quite daring to hope yet. I spoke to the campaign director a short time ago. He said there is definitely a swing on. There is something happening, but is it enough? Is it in the right seats? They're not quite sure. And of course, it's all relative, the potential success for Tony Abbott. A victory would indeed be a famous victory. If they fall a few seats short, well, there'll obviously be disappointment. But at the same time, when you look at where the Liberal Party or the coalition was less than a year ago, when Tony Abbott was not even the leader, there was some expectations in the party they could even lose 30 seats at this election and be out of power for the best part of a decade. So that will also be feeding into the thought success is relative.
In fact, the most telling aspect at this late stage of this election, even those who are daring to predict a victory for their side are only doing it by 1 or 2 seats.
Exactly, and it could be somewhat poetic, I suppose, if Tony Abbott ends up winning the election by one seat. He won the leadership by one vote, and that's just what's so extraordinary about this election. I was talking to a BBC reporter here. He was saying, what's going on? I thought it was going to be Malcolm Turnbull against Kevin Rudd. There was just so many variables. But one of the variables, of course, is just the way the quite extraordinary campaign, an unexpectedly extraordinary campaign that Tony Abbott has run. He's approached it like a marathon, as you say, with the focus, the discipline that people didn't expect he would be able to do. He had a very bad campaign as a health minister 3 years ago, but this one has been very hard fought, and hence we will see later tonight if it was successful.
Mark, thanks for that. We're now a mere 10 minutes into the count, but the numbers are going to start trickling in any minute, and we'll grab the opportunity while we can for a brief news bulletin with Deborah Rice, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Kerry, and good evening. The nation is mourning the deaths of another 2 soldiers in Afghanistan. Private Grant Kirby and Private Thomas Dale were on patrol when a device exploded near their vehicle. 2 other soldiers were wounded. The Prime Minister and the opposition leader offered their condolences to both families, but they reiterated Australia's commitment to see the mission through.
On Election Day in Australia, a stark reminder of the fragility of Afghanistan's democracy.
As a nation, we've lost 2 very brave men, and there are families in this nation today who have lost 2 men they loved very much.
Australia has lost 2 fine soldiers. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends.
35-year-old Private Grant Kirby and 21-year-old Private Thomas Dale had stepped out of their armoured patrol vehicle in the Baluchi Valley when tragedy struck. Once again, a roadside bomb proved the indiscriminate killer.
They are the 19th and 20th of our people killed in Afghanistan. 2 other Australian soldiers were wounded in this incident.
Those injured were flown to the military hospital at Tarin Kot. Both are expected to survive. All 4 Brisbane-based soldiers were part of the first mentoring task force.
Despite their loss, their comrades remain very committed to our mission and to honouring the sacrifice of their fallen mates.
Although fighting season in Afghanistan has aligned with election season back home, political support from the major parties has not faltered.
The mission is worthwhile. We have seen terrorists take the lives of Australians. We need to see the mission through.
It's an important mission, and the Coalition fully supports that mission. It's important that Australia sees that mission through.
A sad task awaits tonight's victor. Nick Harmson, ABC News, Canberra.
More than 14 million voters cast their ballots today, and this year, more than most, it looks as though every one of them will count. The leaders spent much of the day campaigning in marginal seats in an 11th-hour attempt to lock in undecided voters. Political reporter Dana Robertson was with the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard.
On what could conceivably be her final day as Prime Minister, Julia Gillard had the sombre duty of leading the nation's grieving for 2 more fallen soldiers. But nonetheless, the campaigning went on. Her first stop was in Sydney's all-important western suburbs.
This is David Bradbury. Yes, thank you very much for your support.
After a shocking first half, the Prime Minister's campaign hit its stride after she embraced the so-called real Julia, and her campaign gained momentum at the business end. It was chaos at Seabrook School in the western suburbs of Melbourne when the Prime Minister arrived this afternoon to cast her vote.
There we go.
But a year ago, Labor would never have expected to be in this position. The nation's first female Prime Minister in the fight of her life to hold on to her job.
Thank you very much. Lovely of you. Thank you. Prime Minister. I am a lucky Prime Minister. Thank you.
But whether it's bouquets or brickbats come this evening, Julia Gillard will undoubtedly have an anxious night watching it all unfold. Dana Robertson, ABC News, Melbourne.
The opposition leader started his day with a sausage sizzle before getting down to the business of voting and last-minute campaigning. Here's political reporter Hayden Cooper.
After 35 days, it comes down to this. Tony Abbott arrived here at the Queenscliff Surf Lifesaving Club early this morning. He had a morning barbecue with some of his constituents. His whole family was here too for the first time in the campaign because one of his daughters, Frances, has flown back in from overseas for the big occasion. After lining up for a short period with some of his constituents, he then did his democratic duty with his family alongside.
Well done. Thanks, Tony. Thank you.
Well, just because he had cast his vote didn't mean the campaigning was done. Tony Abbott then went on to a few more polling places to try to influence every last vote that he could. He's been confident from start to finish in this campaign, and right at the end, he knows that the polling would suggest that it will be a very tight result.
This is a big day for our country. It's a day when we can vote out a bad government.
Well, now it's down to the count. Tony Abbott will watch the results tonight before joining the Liberal Party function in the CBD of Sydney. Hayden Cooper, ABC News, Sydney.
It's the eastern states that will get the greatest scrutiny tonight, just as they got most of the attention during the campaign. After 5 weeks of political hammering, voters turned out early and in great numbers, and politicians didn't let up on them right to the end.
For a campaign that many voters found as tiresome as the leaders might have found tiring, it was a time for everyone to think positive.
I'm quietly confident the Australian people are going to vote for stability.
Just what Labor wants to hear, for different reasons.
I'm quietly confident.
Perhaps not in Queensland. A former Prime Minister's dumping may have something to do with that. And everybody's wondering how many Labor seats will fall tonight.
I think it'll be a long night. I think it's going to be a very, very close election.
The Coalition's also quietly confident in New South Wales. You'd scarcely believe the man Tony Abbott deposed was deposed at all.
Look, Tony's done a fantastic job. Couldn't have done a better job.
How are you, mate? Good to see you. How are you, ma'am?
In Bennelong, the opposition leader was playing doubles with a former tennis star, John Alexander.
It's multi-skilling. We're asked to do a lot of different things. Good day.
The Labor incumbent, Maxine McHugh, was full of promises.
They will get a rail link from Epping to Parramatta.
The punters had heard that one before. Labor's more confident in the PM's home state, though not in the seat of Melbourne, being vacated by Lindsay Tanner. One Adam Bant could well turn it green. The Greens leader is looking to hold the balance of power in the Senate.
It's not just down to the wire for the big parties, it will be for several seats for the Greens.
And Lee Rhiannon from New South Wales thinks she may be with him.
We have about a 50-50 chance.
In Queensland, the Greens accused the Liberal National Party of hijacking their how-to-vote cards. And in Sydney, the former Liberal leader's posters, curiously at some polling booths, reflected the same hue. Jeff Sims, ABC News.
To sport, and St Kilda has secured a top 4 position on the AFL ladder with a hard-fought win over Richmond. Last night, Geelong outclassed Carlton. Today, Hawthorn humiliated Fremantle, and the Saints held off the determined Tigers. Mark Douglas reports.
The talk all week had been about retiring Tiger Ben Cousins, but it was Richmond's rising star making the early noise.
Riewoldt slots through his first for the afternoon.
Riewoldt's cousin showed touches of brilliance to keep the Saints close. Brendan Goddard lifted Saints' spirits.
Goddard, what a magnificent mark that was!
And Lee Montagna lifted them into the lead. Jack Riewoldt kept the Tigers in touch with 7 goals, but the Saints pulled away in the final term.
And the Saints are starting to flex their muscles.
In Launceston, the understrength Dockers were picked apart by the merciless Hawks.
Stephen Gillen can run in and kick an easy goal.
Lance Franklin was amongst Hawthorn's best with 5 goals, but even his brilliance was overshadowed by this effort from Cyril Rioli.
What a goal by Rioli! Only he can do that! Magnificent stuff!
It wasn't all good news for the Hawks, who lost Luke Hodge to a knee injury. Last night, Gary Ablett helped Geelong kick away from Carlton for a comfortable 42-point win, but the Star Cat was hampered by a hand injury, while key forward James Podsiadly faces suspension for a clumsy bump on the Blues' Bryce Gibbs. In the NRL, the Panthers put a massive dent into South Sydney's finals hopes last night, while the Knights continued the Broncos' recent woes. In Penrith, the Rabbitohs were swamped by an early onslaught from the home team and were well beaten before half-time. The Panthers ran in 7 unanswered tries to lead by 40 points to nil after as many minutes.
He flick passes to Gordon!
Standing in for injured fullback Lachlan Coote, Michael Gordon contributed 30 points as the Panthers jumped to second on the ladder. In Newcastle, the Broncos looked like they'd returned to form with an impressive opening 20 minutes against the Knights.
Hopman will sprint away and score.
But without injured skipper Darren Lockyer, the visitors lost their way. The Knights piled on 8 tries to keep their slim chance of making the finals alive. Mark Douglas, ABC News.
In swimming, Australia had a mixed night at the Pan Pacific Championships in California. The team won 4 silver and 4 bronze medals. The USA dominated the night, winning 8 gold medals. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. A series of troughs will draw warm northwesterly winds into the east, spreading rain and thunder across the central interior and into southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. The front bringing showers to WA will move towards the southeast of Australia with showers and strengthening northwesterly winds in its advance. Tomorrow an early shower for Perth, but the outlook for the other capital cities is mostly sunny, though Canberra will start the day with frost. That's the news for now. Back to the tally room with Kerry O'Brien.
Welcome back to the tally room here in Canberra, where the count of 14 million votes has already begun. This is a night that could produce any one of 4 different results. A nail-biting win for Labor, an equally slender win for the Coalition, or a hung parliament with minority government formed by either of the 2 major parties, with 1 or more of the 3 independents and possibly 1 new member of the Greens in the House of Representatives. There may even be a 4th independent, who knows? With me, 2 of the sharpest numbers men in Australian politics, Foreign Minister Stephen Smith and former Liberal Senate leader Nick Minchin, who's travelled with Tony Abbott throughout this campaign. Now, the way these seats are going to fall, obviously we're going to be looking primarily at Queensland and New South Wales. But if Labor loses a lot of seats, it really could come down to a couple of seats in Victoria, 1 or 2 in South Australia, even 1 or 2 in Western Australia, even, dare I say, at the seat of Solomon in the Territory, because everybody seems to be assuming that no seats are going to change hands in Tasmania.
Well, in general terms, that's right. We will have a swing against us in Queensland, a swing against us in New South Wales. The question will be the extent to which we can stem the flow and minimise the losses. What would be of really invaluable assistance to us would be if we could pick up a seat in Victoria, McEwen, Latrobe, Dunkley, a roughie, or a seat in South Australia, and Boothby may be a roughie prospect for us there. If we do that, we win 1 from the Coalition. It's an extra 2 that they have to win to get into government. So, and we know there are
But equally you could lose Corangamite in Victoria.
I think we'll hang on to Corangamite. I think the published polls do show we're doing well in Victoria and South Australia and doing it tough in New South Wales and Queensland. I think one of the reasons for that is that we might be seeing a bit of a change here in Australian politics. Historically, the public have made a clear distinction between federal elections and state elections. And so, for example, Bob Carr doing very well in New South Wales at the same time as John Howard did very well. There's no doubt that we are suffering from brand Labor in Queensland and New South Wales as a result of long-standing, long-term governments there. But to win a seat in Victoria, to win a seat in South Australia, and maybe to hang on to Hasluck and Swan in the West would be a substantial contribution to hanging on. But there'll be swings against us, and the risk is that whilst we might overall get 50% of the 2-party preferred vote, we lose it on the ground in Queensland and New South Wales.
Now, Nick mentioned you concentrated with Tony Abbott very heavily in New South Wales and Queensland. Did you see clear evidence that the damage to the New South Wales brand was bleeding across to federal Labor?
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating about this election in particular are this demonstration of these regional variations in Australia, and I think this is going to be an increasing phenomenon where you get states going in different directions. And I must say what most struck me in the campaign was the anti-Labor mood in Western Sydney, which obviously is heavily influenced by state politics, and indeed the swing to the Liberal Party in the Penrith by-election of 25% is the reason I think Kevin Rudd bit the dust. That happened 3 days after that by-election. And what was also very interesting was the incredibly adverse reaction to the Labor promise on this Parramatta-Epping Railway. You'd think promising $2.5 billion for a railway would be a hallelujah moment. Instead, it just completely backfired on Labor, which shows you the antipathy to Labor and all the broken promises.
Do you think it will turn out that has actually hurt Maxine McEwen-Bennelong?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think Bennelong is one of the seats to watch tonight, and I predict that we will take that seat back, and I think it has hurt Labor.
Yeah. Now, Anthony Green, have we got any figures yet, anything to talk about?
Just broad figures. Swing, these are all 0.1% counted in New South Wales, a 4% swing against Labor. Queensland, 0.1% counted, just under 8% swing. And in Victoria, the latest figure is 4% swing against Labor. Now, these are very early figures. But for a while, we won't get anything sensible individual seats. We'll be getting these sorts of figures. I must say, you tend to get country seats first, so there's nothing meaningful in those figures. No swing at all in Tasmania going on. That's the most advanced count at this stage.
Now, one of the differences with this campaign to any election, going all the way back to 1987, is that we get the whole of the East Coast in one hit. There is no daylight saving differential anywhere on the East Coast. So when the numbers do start flowing, they could come through quite quickly.
In the next 15 minutes, we'll be getting meaningful figures.
Okay. The disenchantment of many Labor voters, particularly over climate change, has been manna from heaven for the Greens, who are looking for their best ever result tonight, including their first ever lower house seat at a general election, the seat of Melbourne, held until his retirement by Labor star Lindsay Tanner. Now, there was a Green elected to the seat of Cunningham many years ago in a by-election, but that seat was lost again at the election that followed. Now, Heather Ewart is in the heart of this previous Labor stronghold at the Melbourne Town Hall, and we'll just cross to her now. Heather, you've actually, in your coverage of the campaign, you took a very close look at this seat. It sounds as if even Labor is just about writing it off tonight.
Oh, I think it's fair to say that Labor has written this seat off. All of the Labor power brokers that I spoke to last night and again today, and this included senior figures in the party who know this seat very well, have said to me that it is gone. It's gone to the Greens candidate, Adam Bandt, who ran last time and ran it close up against Lindsay Tanner. I think Labor knew that the resignation of Lindsay Tanner was always going to make it tough for them because he had a huge personal following amongst Labor voters in this seat. Kath Botel, the Labor candidate, here now is well known and respected in the Labor movement, but she doesn't have that same crucial following that Lindsay Tanner had. So they're very much giving it to the Greens at this stage.
And one would have thought that the events that happened around the emissions trading scheme and climate change policy with Labor generally was basically a gift in this seat.
It was a huge gift. Look, it's an interesting seat. It was, I suppose, once traditional blue-collar Labor, way back in the old days, but it's very much changed. You do still have the high-rise housing commission flats with blue-collar workers and immigrants, but very much there are progressive Labor-type voters in this seat, progressives who are furious about the backflip on climate change, also very unhappy with the way Labor has handled the issue of asylum seekers, and you could see way back, I think, at the start of this year, that they were heading to the Greens in droves.
Okay, now there are a huge number of marginal seats in this election being counted tonight, which is going to put enormous pressure on the Electoral Commission with its counting processes. Now, you've got somebody from the Electoral Commission there. I'll be very interested to hear what they have to say about how it's going to take place.
We do indeed. I'm actually this is the largest polling booth in Victoria, and certainly the largest for the seat of Melbourne. These people are about to start counting votes here in the next few minutes. They'll be working right through till midnight. And I'm joined now by Stephen Kennedy from the Australian Electoral Commission, who's going to take us through how some of the methods are changing this time around.
You're right, the polling places are all closed now. We are at the largest one in Victoria, over 200 AEC staff working here. As you can see, they're starting to do the last cross-checks and balances and counting will commence now. It's commencing in all polling places on the eastern seaboard. We should start to get some results from small country booths coming through at about 20 to 7. For these larger booths, like the Town Hall and the other big metro ones, particularly in Melbourne, you won't get any tangible results till about 7:30.
Now, there are a lot of marginal seats right around the country. Is that going to make it much harder to be able to decide when this election has been won or lost?
It's hard to predict, Heather. One thing that will help it this year is we've had a change in the legislation. Almost 2 million Australians have voted before today. Now, normally we wouldn't start counting those till next week, but with the change in the legislation, we look to count about 700,000 of those tonight. That will give us a much clearer picture in those marginal seats.
OK, Stephen Kennedy, thank you very much for joining us.
And thanks, Heather. We'll start to see some figures shortly that may begin to make some sense, and it won't take long for the trickle to become a pretty fast-flowing stream of votes right up and down the East Coast, as well as Tasmania, with South Australia and the Northern Territory just half an hour behind. I can't think of an election with dynamics like this one in my lifetime. Counting the marginals on both sides of the pendulum, there are 28 Labor seats on margins below 5% and 21 coalition seats, although nearly all of the action tonight will be on the Labor side. Lee Sales has a more detailed breakdown.
To understand the Coalition's task tonight, we need to go back 3 years to the night before the 2007 federal election. John Howard was the Prime Minister with a 27-seat majority. On election night, a 5.5% swing to Labor spelt the end of the Howard era, and Kevin Rudd moved into the Lodge. 28 seats changed hands that night, 26 of those from the Liberal Party to Labor. The ALP ended up with 83 seats, the Liberal Party 55, the National Party 10, and there were also 2 independents. But after each election, the Australian Electoral Commission reviews the electoral map to make sure there's roughly the same number of voters in each seat. If there aren't, the Commission shifts the boundaries. That happened after the last election, and it changes the way we need to look at certain electorates, because 6 seats won by the Coalition in 2007 have become notionally Labor after the redistribution. Swan in Western Australia, Greenway, Macarthur and Gilmore in New South Wales, and Dixon and Herbert in Queensland are all marginally Labor, but the incumbents have been Liberal MPs. What this means is that the Coalition has effectively lost 5 seats since 2007. Here's how the existing chamber looks. Labor holds 88 seats, including those 5 notional gains, the Coalition 59 seats, and the independents round out the numbers with 3. Earlier I mentioned 2 independents. The third, Rob Oakeshott, joined the federal parliament in September 2008 after a by-election in the New South Wales seat of Lyme. With all this in mind, the Coalition tonight needs to win at least 17 seats to claim government, including at least 5 of those 6 notionally Labor electorates. Their seats well worth watching tonight, and we'll certainly be keeping you up to date with what's going on there. I'll be back in about half an hour or so with an early summary of results. Kerry.
Tonight is all about the numbers. The party that wins at least 76 seats will win government. For the Coalition, that means they have to score a net gain of 17 seats, nearly all of which will have to come from Queensland and New South Wales. I'll just give you a quick flavour of the kinds of seats we're talking about, because even if there is a Liberal tide flowing, it may not be irresistible in every Labor seat with a small margin. First to Queensland and the seat of Herbert in Townsville that has a tiny notional margin favouring Labor of 0.3% after the last redistribution. The popular Liberal MP, Peter Lindsay, has retired, and the high-profile Labor candidate is the former Mayor of Townsville, Tony Mooney. The Coalition's Ewan Jones has an interesting night ahead. Flynn, on a margin of 2.2% based in and around Gladstone on the central Queensland coast, was won by Chris Trevor for Labor in 2007. His competition tonight will be Ken O'Dowd. Then there's Longman, stretching from Brisbane's outer north to the tip of the Sunshine Coast on a tight margin also of 1.9%. Dramatically won by Labor's John Sullivan in 2007 when he ousted Liberal Minister Mel Brough. Now, John Sullivan's recontesting the seat, and his challenger is this election's youngest candidate, 20-year-old Wyatt Roy. Then there's Ford on Brisbane's southern flank, extending down the Brisbane-Gold Coast corridor, which Brett Raguse won for Rudd Labor in 2007 and holds with a cushion of 3.4%. Bert Van Manen is contesting Ford for the Coalition. And then there's Dixon on a razor-thin 0.8%, but fascinating to watch tonight. Coalition frontbencher Peter Dutton, the Shadow Health Minister, will struggle to hold this seat, or he may have struggled to hold this seat after the redistribution, facing a fresh challenge from his 2007 opponent, Labor's Fiona McNamara, but the Ides may be flowing with him tonight. ABC reporter Kieran McKechnie is at Peter Dutton's electorate office. Now, Kieran, there was a time when Peter Dutton feared for this seat to the extent that he sought pre-selection elsewhere, but the mood seems to be that he's going to be back in the Parliament for another term.
Well, yes, Kerry. I mean, Peter Dutton just won this seat with 217 votes to spare last time. It was incredibly tight. I think it's still going to be tight here. As you mentioned, there was a redistribution in this seat, so it is now notionally Labor. However, speaking to people at LNP headquarters in Brisbane, they're very confident that they're holding on to Dixon tonight. They're sure it's going to stay in Peter Dutton's hands. Now, the big problem for Peter Dutton throughout this campaign has been, of course, this perception that he tried to jump ship. He shopped around for a different seat. He tried to gain pre-selection in a safer seat on the Gold Coast. He failed in that bid, and so he was stuck with Dixon. Now, the Labor Party has not let him forget that. They called him the member for TBA, and during the campaign, his opponent, Fiona McNamara, unveiled T-shirts that all of her campaign workers wore, saying, "Dutton dumped me, now he wants me back." She didn't let voters forget it. Now, Peter Dutton doesn't think that that's going to affect his vote, but all it really needs is a couple of hundred people to have been offended by that, I guess, perception that he tried to shop around for something better, and the seat could change hands.
Thanks for that, Kieran. I imagine if the swing is on away from Labor, then he won't miss it either. Thanks. In New South Wales, there are at least 9 Labor seats in play, and we'll take a quick look now at a few of them. Eden Monero is the perennial bellwether seat since '72 at the southern New South Wales electorate, has fallen to the party that has won government. Sitting MP Mike Kelly's margin of 2.3% makes this a seat the Liberals will be desperate to win with David Gazard. Bennelong, one of the most intriguing contests in the nation. In 2007, Maxine McHugh famously wrestled it away from John Howard and the Liberal Party, and they've thrown everything at Bennelong to win it back tonight with their own high-profile candidate, former tennis professional John Alexander. With a margin of 1.4%, it's extremely vulnerable for Labor. There's Macarthur in Sydney's western suburbs, been held by Liberals' Pat Farmer, who's now retired. A redistribution has tentatively given Macarthur to Labor by an ultra-thin 0.5%, a tiny firewall for Labor's Nick Bleasdale with which to fend off the Liberals' Russell Matheson. And at 0.3%, Macquarie, in and around the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, is Labor's most marginal seat. The sitting member, Bob Debus, is retiring at this election, and the contest here becomes more interesting because the sitting Liberal member in nearby Greenway, Louise Marcus, is now contesting Macquarie after a discouraging redistribution in her old seat. And Louise Marcus joins me now. How are you feeling? Not only how has the campaign gone, but what has the mood been around the booths today?
It's been very mixed, Kerry. I'm quietly confident. In some parts of the electorate, extremely positive. Other parts of the electorate, it's very hard to tell at this stage. It'll be a very, very tight result. Now,
what would you pinpoint as the key issue or issues that will decide this result tonight?
There are a number of issues that are really critical both to people in the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury, Kerry. 2 key ones that have probably been a standout. One is roads and rail, and the challenge with people competing with freight. People in the mountains in particular and in the upper Hawkesbury want to see freight moving off their roads and into rail. The second issue, which is extremely important to the whole electorate, is access to health services.
Now, to what extent have you seen evidence of a bleeding of the New South Wales Labor brand across to Julia Gillard's federal Labor?
Bit early to tell at this stage, Kerry, but what people in New South Wales are saying to me is that they've really had enough of Labor. They don't trust them. and they do question, particularly with what has happened with Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard now being installed, that this may be exactly what New South Wales Labor have done, and that federal Labor are doing the same thing.
And very quickly, are you feeling good about tonight? When it really comes down to it, do you think you're going to win?
We'll have to wait till it's all counted. I have to say, Kerry, it's too close to call. You know, I've fought hard. Can I just thank Kerry, my team? I've just had a wonderful selection of volunteers, and my team behind me have been great. They're all behind me now, I think, and they've been wonderful. I want to thank them. It's been a team effort. I hope that the result is positive both for us and the nation.
Good on you. Thanks, Louise Marcus, and we may talk to you later in the night. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry.
Okay. Now we're going to take the opportunity to look at a few seats. We mentioned earlier Corangamite in Victoria, which is potentially one of the vital seats tonight. This is a seat that's held by Labor, by Darren Cheeseman. It's around southern Geelong and the coast west of Melbourne, and he's got it on a very slender margin of 0.9%. Now, there's only 0.8% of the vote counted, Anthony, but is it telling us anything?
Yes, we've got a number of booths in now. At this stage, these are the smaller rural areas, and Sarah Henderson is well ahead at this stage on 61.8, Darren Cheeseman on 28.5. But be aware, they're raw numbers. The next graphic, we compare those figures with the figures in the same booths last time, which brings the contest in closer. 4.6% swing, which at this stage we're saying the Liberal Party's ahead. We're not giving the seat away. So at this stage, Darren Cheeseman and Sarah Henderson, good first figures in three preference count booths there for Sarah Henderson, but certainly not enough to give the seat away.
Now we're going to jump to the other end of the country in the seat of Leichhardt in North Queensland, which takes in Cairns, from Cairns to Cape York. This was held for some time by Warren Inch for the Liberals. Jim Turner won it at the last election. He's currently sitting on a margin of 4.1%, but Warren Inch is back contesting it for the Liberal National Party.
And he's well ahead on these. He's ahead on these primary votes. These are from a number of places up in the Torres Straits, so they're not actually representative. 80% of the electorate is in Cairns, so it's an electorate where you'll have to wait for those later figures to come in. But if we factor in that that's from Torres Strait Island, 56.2, it's a 10% swing. We've got it marked as an LNP gain. As I said, I'm not convinced that they're actually representative booths at this stage. So Leichhardt, we've shown Warren Inch being returned at this stage. I'd be prepared to wait a little bit longer on those figures.
OK, now we'll take a look at the seat of Flynn moving down the coast from Cairns to central Queensland, based largely around Gladstone. Now this was taken by Chris Trevor for Labor at the last election. He's sitting on a margin of 2.2%, with 2.8% of the vote counted, Anthony. This is potentially an interesting seat tonight.
Well, at this stage, this one isn't swinging like Leichhardt. Ken O'Dowd is ahead. This is a very diverse electorate. It's got Gladstone in it, it's got mining towns, and it's got rural communities. Chris Trevor's well behind on these figures. Again, we've got 2 candidate preferred counts in 7 of the 10 booths in this electorate, and that's factoring in a swing of 1.3%, which is not enough for Labor to lose the seat at this stage. Again, we haven't given that away. That's only Labor Party ahead, but that's quite a different first figure than we saw in Leichhardt. At this stage, we'll be coming back to Flynn later in the evening. All
right, well, now we'll jump to the seat of Ford, which takes in the outer southern areas of Brisbane. Well, this was won by Brett Raguse for Labor, again at the last election, part of the Rudd swing. He sits on a margin of 3.4%. Now, just a small amount of the vote counted.
Well, this was a massive swing at the last election. We have only 2 booths. Both of them are joint booths on the border with Ford, which always makes you slightly concerned because joint booths can attract some different sort of votes. 19% there for the Greens. That's a very big vote. Again, very small. No, they're very small numbers. There's only a couple of hundred votes here, and that's a 20%. I've actually got later figures than that, and the margin, the LNP is still ahead. But no, I think we'll discount that one for the moment. That's a little bit too early to call.
OK, so we'll be patient with Ford for a little while. But we're going to go back up now to the seat of Dawson, which is around Mackay and central Queensland again, but north of Gladstone. We've got, again, James Bidgood was the Labor member here. He held it in 2007, but he's retiring. Ostensibly, it's a margin of 2.6% to Labor.
Well, Mike Brunker is the new Labor candidate. George Christensen is on Mackay City Council. Mike Brunker is the mayor of Whitsunday. At this stage, he's well behind. These are, again, very early figures. I wouldn't put a mammoth store, 11% swing on, I think that's done on one tiny booth from Bloomsbury, which is at the back of Mackay from memory. So again, that's a very early call. Again, we're seeing three sweet swings in big swings in some seats and then one not in another. So you do have to wait for a while on these early figures. But we are seeing a sort of quite a swing in Queensland at this stage.
Okay, we'll come back to Brisbane. This is the inner This is actually the seat of Brisbane in the inner suburbs, held by one of Kevin Rudd's, now Julia Gillard's ministers, Arch Bevis. He's held it since 1990 and he's sitting on a margin of 4.6%. We've actually got 3.4% of the vote counted.
The interesting here, Teresa Gambaro is the Liberal candidate. She's the former member for Petrie. Also interesting in this is Andrew Bartlett, the former Democrat senator, who's running as a Green. Now, we have three first preference booths there. Clayfield, the divisional returning officers, postal votes, and Stafford West. So they're a combination of booths. It's a swing of 7.7%, and at this stage, that's not indicating, it's not giving it away, and that's correct. It's not so you can give away yet, but they're very early figures in that stage. That's again a big vote for the Greens there.
Okay, well let's try and get some sense of what's going on around. Let's take a look at the state picture, Anthony, with our state swing graphic.
Okay, what we're seeing so far, the first graphic we're looking at is Queensland. We're seeing a swing of 6% in Queensland, not quite as big as Newspoll was reporting this morning, but 6% if Uniform would deliver 10 seats to the Liberal Party, to the new LNP in Queensland. So that's a big swing that's going on there in Queensland. Compared to that, let's have a look at New South Wales.
But bearing in mind at the same time, it's going to depend what the pattern of that swing is.
It does depend whether it's uniform or not, and it does depend where the votes are from.
Yeah.
At this stage, we have early figures mainly from country areas.
Okay.
4.2% is the swing in New South Wales. That's in line with the polls this morning, which puts in line there. We'll see how those seats fall, but that's, again, that swing could be very patchy. We won't know that for a while, how that's going.
Okay, we might take a look at the Victorian picture as well.
The Victorian swing, 1.1% is the swing to the Liberal Party at the moment. Again, there's a lot of rural figures in these. There's not many Melbourne figures in these early figures. So the pattern is bigger in New South Wales and Queensland, smaller in Victoria. But at this stage of the evening, they tend to be heavily biased towards country votes.
Okay, we might just tap into some of our other experts on Tony Jones's panel now, George Brandis and Penny Wong. Tony?
Yes, George Brandis, looking at these early figures, I know that you were actually campaigning or on a booth in Brisbane, the electorate of Brisbane this morning. Yeah. I mean, what's your feeling looking at these very early figures and the swings that are being indicated?
Well, let me issue the usual caveat that these are very early figures and one doesn't want to extrapolate too far from them. All I can tell you, Tony, from all of the field evidence or the anecdotal evidence this morning is a view common, I might say, to both Labor and Liberal booth workers in Brisbane, was that there was a movement of some dimension against the Labor Party in that seat. Now, the early figures that you just put up show a swing of 7.7%. I suspect that will come back a bit.
We saw the Newspoll earlier today show a massive decline in Labor's primary vote in the course of 1 week.
Yeah.
What could be happening if this swing is on?
Well, one thing you've got to remember about the Queensland electorate, Tony, is that it does tend, when it makes up its mind, to shift quite sharply. And I think there was a palpable sense, certainly in and around Brisbane in the past week, of the momentum being with my side and away from the Labor Party. Now, to what extent that will continue into today, to what extent that will continue up the coast in some of those coastal seats, I'm not in a position to predict, but certainly we are cautiously confident of a good result in Queensland.
Let's go to Penny Wong. I mean, what sense are you getting? I mean, the Newspoll figures must have been a huge shock to anyone look, but admittedly quite small samples.
Oh well, look, we know we're in for a tough fight. It's been a very tough election campaign, and as Julia said, it's going to be a pretty close finish. We've certainly got some issues in Queensland, and I think we know that our members there are in for a tough fight. And the question is, how big is the swing, and where is it? Obviously, if it's not uniform, and we can hold a range of our marginals in Queensland, then that's a good thing for the government.
It's an open question we'll have to find out about. Let me ask you this. We just heard from Heather Hewitt, who's down in the seat of Melbourne, which is Lindsay Tanner's old seat, and she's saying Labor's pretty much given it away to the Greens. So the Greens will get one definite seat from in the House of Reps, first time ever. Adam Bandt, Green MP.
Well, I think it's pretty early to be declaring a seat won or lost, but I think there's no doubt Melbourne is a very tough fight. We've got a great candidate, Kath Botel, a woman who's been one of the lead champions against work choices and helped work on delivering the Fair Work Act. She's an outstanding member of the Labor movement, but she's had a very tough campaign. We've seen, obviously, Lindsay's retirement and the personal vote there, and of course, throughout this campaign, throughout all of the polls, we've seen a very significant increase in the Green primary vote. Obviously, Melbourne is one of the seats where that matters.
Do you accept the Greens are capitalising on Labor's backflip on climate change action? I mean, you're the minister after all.
Well,
I mean, are you feeling any sense of responsibility at this early stage?
It is ironic, isn't it, that a party who voted with Tony Abbott to sink the carbon pollution reduction scheme may well benefit from that. And obviously also in Melbourne, the Liberal Party is choosing to preference the Greens as well. So that makes it a tough seat for us to hold in the circumstances. But Kath's a great candidate.
Okay, we've got two senators here, so I'm going to go to the Senate. We haven't talked about that yet, but of course the Greens hope to hold the balance of power in the Senate. It's a really interesting scenario you've got, though, constitutionally, because, for example, if Stephen Fielding were to lose his Senate seat tonight, he'll still be there for another 11 months. So the Greens' hopes of holding the balance of power rest in the ACT, oddly enough. Can you explain to us why that is?
Well, as you've alluded to, in the territories, the senators take office immediately, and obviously the Greens are targeting Senator Gary Humphries' seat in the ACT, and if they gain that obviously has an impact on the Senate numbers. And I don't know whether George's view, what he thinks about where Gary is on that, but certainly the Greens have run a very strong campaign.
I do have a view. I think that although the Greens will undoubtedly poll quite strongly in the ACT, in order to displace Gary Humphries, they'd really have to get effectively a third of the vote, and I don't see that happening. I'd be very confident that this constitutional conundrum that fascinates you, Tony, will be a hypothetical.
Probably fascinates the whole of Australia by the time it actually happens. Thanks very much to both of you. We'll be back with you shortly.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we're going to continue looking at interesting seats, but Stephen Smith has got some interesting information on a few of them himself right now. Stephen?
Well, reinforce Anthony's point. They're very small and very early, but Bennelong on about 1.5% counted. There's a 7% swing against us there. We always knew Bennelong would be tough. It's very early days. McEwen on 1% counted, there's a 7% swing towards us. And a good point to make here is Fran Bailey, of course, is retiring, so you take away that local member incumbency.
That was a very tight margin.
This is the prospect for us. Also in Leichhardt on about 2% counted, on about 3.5% counted, 10% swing against us, against Jim Turnow. He, of course, is up against Warren Entsch, who's trying to make a comeback, and he's well regarded. Again, it's very early, but Leichhardt and McEwen do show you the importance of the standing of the candidate, and I think we'll see a bit of that before the night's out. Yeah, well, we'll take a look at those seats now, starting with Bennelong. This, as we've said, is northwest of Sydney Harbour. It's been a traditional Liberal seat until Maxine McHugh took it from John Howard at the last election. 1.4% margin, and our figure's only 0.4% counted.
We've got one booth. This is one of the Gladesville booths, and at this stage, John Alexander is ahead. These are only a small number, 46.3 to 38.1. But in that single booth, what we see on the next graphic is we see a swing of 7.2%. That's listed as a Lib gain. It is only one booth. Formula works out that way. I'd wait for 2 or 3 more booths before definitely giving away to John Alexander. But for the Liberal Party, that is a very encouraging first booth in Bennelong.
OK, now we're going to look at the seat of Gilmore on the New South Wales South Coast. Joanna Gash has held this for the Liberals since '96, but the redistribution has made this, on paper, a Labor seat on a margin of 0.4%. So with 4.2% of the vote counted, Anthony?
Well, Joanna Gash will win this seat easily. It's been expected she would win this easily. She's well ahead on these votes. 50.8% of the first preference votes. Again, we factor in which booth the information is from to make our prediction, and we're predicting a 7.9% swing to Liberal Party. So Joanna Gash is re-elected. It's notionally a Liberal gain. It's one of the seats Liberals need to win, but Joanna Gash easily returned in Gilmore.
OK, Eden Monaro, one of the very interesting seats in New South Wales, as we've said, takes from Queanbeyan, just outside Canberra, and sprawls across to the southern coast and up into the mountains. Mike Kelly holds this for Labor on a margin of 2.3%. There's 2% of the vote counted.
We'll use the numbers which are in the graphic. I'm just trying to see if I've got later figures, so I'll continue on here. Mike Kelly's ahead on those numbers. I've got slightly newer figures which are similar on the first preferences. When we factor in where that information is from, we're seeing a swing of 2.2 to Labor. I've got the swing as only 0.1 to the Liberal Party, and I've got a preference count in 10 of the 79 booths. The computer's given that away to Mike Kelly on those numbers. The slightly later figures I've got have him probably still ahead, but not definitely ahead, but certainly no sign of a big swing in Eden Monaro. OK, the seat of Macquarie, this is a very marginal seat for Labor, was held by Bob Davis. He's retired, and Louise Marcus, as we said, was the Liberal member of Greenway. She's moved across. 3% of the vote counted, Anthony. And at this stage, I can't see, our graphics are slightly behind, unfortunately, at the moment. The figures I've got, Louise Marcus is on 56.9, Susan Templeman on 25.6. Now, these are some small booths from the Mount Wilson, Mount Victoria, at the Mountains end of the election. I've got a swing at 2.7, the same as the one there, and that's indicating that it's in doubt and the Liberals are ahead in that seat. It's not given away, but that's a good first figure for the Liberal Party, and at this stage we're not giving it away. OK, now the seat of Cowper on the New South Wales North Coast. This is a marginal coalition seat, National Party seat, with 1.2%. This takes in Coffs Harbour, Kempsey, so on. Held by Luke Hartsucker, 4.3% of the vote counted. And at this stage, the graphics we've got for slightly behind it. The figures are roughly the same. Luke Hartsucker on 1,443, 57% of the vote. Paul Seckfee on 26.4. When we factor in the booth that information is from, we're seeing a 6.7% swing to the National Party, and Luke Hartsucker will retain that easily for the National Party. So the National Party have retained their hold on that North Coast seat. OK, now the seat of McEwen that Stephen Smith was talking about a moment ago, this was Fran Bailey's seat. She was very important as the sitting member for the Liberals, Central Victoria and the Yarra Valley. She held that since '96. She's retired, and with 2.9% of the vote counted. Again, I've got later figures than the computer shows. If one of my technicians is listening, if they can find out why the graphics are behind the numbers at the moment. But at the moment, the Liberal Party's well ahead on those first preference votes. I have a slight 3% counted and have preference counts in 4 booths. The swing there's 4.8 to Labor. I've got an even bigger swing now, 5.7 swing to Labor. And on those numbers, Rob Mitchell, who used to be in the state upper house in Victoria, he will go on to win the seat, and certainly on the later figures I've got, that's what he'll occur. OK, Nick mentioned, I know there are early figures, but...
had Brisbane looked at, might be worth looking at, because that's an inner city seat where there's been 6.1% counted and showing a 5% swing to the Liberal candidate, Theresa Gambaro, which would of course give us the seat. I mean, I generally think any numbers less than about 10% are a bit dodgy, but we're getting into the 6% country, and if we can pick up a seat like Brisbane, an inner city seat, and you're getting swings of 5 to 6%, then we could be seeing the sort of flow through in Queensland that many have anticipated. Because you've got to remember there was a huge swing to the Labor Party in 2007 on the back of Kevin Rudd and Wayne Swan. And that's the worry for Labor, that the tide then goes back out again.
I think it's a very good point that Nick has made. I mean, a number of these seats we won on swings as high as 10 to 14%. So you expect them to move back, and that's one of the dangers.
Yeah.
And for example, I've just got here in Longman, for example, it's only 1.5% counted, but Longman swing against us is 10%. Now that'd be an outlying booth, and it's too small, but it's an additional factor. You've got, and for example, the Liberal Party bunting today in Queensland was all Anna Bligh. So you've got the state factors as well, and then you've got a big swing to get over the line in 07. You've got to expect that some of that's going to come back.
But Anna Bligh says it's all Kevin Rudd's fault, I saw.
Well, it's just we're in the hot seat today.
But it's obviously very volatile. And I mean, part of the feedback I heard today from Queensland was that from Labor's perspective, in regional Queensland, it was a somewhat happier situation than in the city of Brisbane, where it was described to me as gloomy.
Well, I'd be surprised. I mean, because this mining tax is really resonating in regional Queensland, and the feeling I got on the ground in regional Queensland was, you know, as Stephen mentioned, Herbert and Leichhardt, I think we will pick up from Labor tonight.
Okay.
I think Herbert...
Just very quickly.
Herbert is a show for us, I think, because you've got Peter Lindsay retiring. That makes it, you know, a bit more of a go for us, but time will tell.
Okay, now we're going to break away for a mere minute and a half. We're just going to catch some news headlines and then we're going to come straight back to the count.
Thanks, Kerry. The nation is mourning the deaths of 2 Australian soldiers in Afghanistan. The family of Private Grant Kirby tonight said he was proud to serve his country. He and Comrade Private Thomas Dale were killed by a roadside bomb while overseeing an Afghan patrol in the Baluchi Valley. 2 other Australian soldiers were wounded.
This work is vital for Australia's security and for the safety and security of all Australians. It is tough. Very tough, and it's dangerous.
20 Australians have been killed since the war began 9 years ago. Counting is underway in what's tipped to be one of the closest elections in Australian political history. Election day polls showed Labor and the Coalition neck and neck. The Greens have vowed to work with whichever party wins. They're hopeful of having the balance of power in the Senate. Israel and the Palestinians have agreed to resume direct peace talks within weeks. The dialogue will begin in Washington on September the 2nd.
There have been difficulties in the past. There will be difficulties ahead. Without a doubt, we will hit more obstacles.
The US says the goal is to reach a peace deal within a year. And the United Nations is appealing for more helicopters to help deliver aid to millions of flood victims in Pakistan. 3 weeks into the emergency, the UN's World Food Programme says it has only 10 helicopters to cover the entire country. More rain and flooding is forecast for the coming week. Now back to Kerry O'Brien in the tally room.
Where the action is starting to hot up now, we're going to plunge straight into some more seat counts. We're going to focus on Queensland for a few minutes, where there is clearly a swing on. The size of the swing we're going to try and work out. We'll start with the seat of Bowman, which takes in around the Brisbane Bayside area. Bowman is held on a very slender margin by the Liberals, Andrew Laming. He's held it since 2004. We've got 1.6% of the vote counted. Anthony?
Yeah, the Election Commission had this one so close it gave both parties the same number of votes. These are a small entry of votes, 1.5% counted. 45.7% for Andrew Laming, Jenny Peters 38. We've got 4 first preference booths in that lot, and we've got 1 preference count for that booth, for that electorate. When we factor in that preference count, it shows the 15%. I will point out that is the Dunwich booth, which I think is on North Stradbroke or Dunwich. It's on North Stradbroke Island, or one of the islands. Yep. It's not a representative booth, so you can't take 15%. I think everyone's accepted the Labor Party will not win Bowman. I think there's a general perception that the swing will be well against Labor there.
Okay, now we'll look at the seat of Blair, which is around Ipswich and in the Brisbane Valley. We've got a lot of votes counted here. Now, this is held by Shane Newman for Labor since 2007. With a margin of 7%, we got nearly 18% of the vote counted, and there is a swing against him.
And this was we've got preference counts in 12 of the 53 booths. Shane Newman is ahead. Neil Zabel, this is based on Ipswich and the Esk Valley to the north. Shane Newman's ahead on those first preferences. 11 votes there with Patricia Peterson, who's not directed preferences to Labor from memory. From my memory, 5.4% swing. The seat is in doubt, and Labor is ahead at this stage of the night. This stage, we're not giving Blair away. The margin was increased in that seat by the redistribution.
Okay, the seat of Bonner, which is in Brisbane's inner eastern suburbs. Kerry Ray picked this up in 2007 for Labor with a margin of 4.5%. And nearly 7% of the vote counted.
And Ross Faster is the former member. He held the seat from his creation in 2004 to 2007. It's named after Neville Bonner, the Indigenous senator from Queensland. Ross Faster's ahead on those first preference votes. We've got a preference count from Tangalooma. Again, it's one of the booths off the, well, it's not off the coast, can't remember where it is, I've forgotten now. Anyway, the Bono, there's a 1.9% swing to the Liberals, not enough to change, but certainly that seat's too much in doubt. We haven't got enough of the vote counted there.
OK, now we come to Kevin Rudd's seat of Griffith in Brisbane's inner southern suburbs. We're about to come to it. There it is. Held by Kevin Rudd since 1998. Did have a margin of 12.3%. Bit of a move on here with 4.4% of the vote counted.
And Kevin Rudd is the sitting member. He's held it since 98. Kevin Rudd 1782 to Rebecca Doherty 1405. 46 to 36, 13% there with the Greens. Some small numbers with the other minor parties. And at this stage, that's translating into a swing of 4.5%, which means that the Labor Party would retain that. It is currently the safest Labor seat in Queensland.
All right, now we're going to come to the panel and get some more figures again, but just quickly we'll take a look at the state swing in Queensland again. Anthony?
We're doing a comparison of the states here. What we're seeing in Queensland, overall we're seeing a swing of 5.8% to the LNP in Queensland. So that's a significant swing to them. The question is, that could deliver them 10 seats. The question is, how uniform will that swing be? Will it deliver the 10 seats?
OK, we'll have a look at the New South Wales swing.
In New South Wales, the swing is 6.1% to the coalition. Again, the question is, will this be uniform in every seat?
But how much counted?
6%. At this stage, that's sort of settling into a swing. The question is whether every seat has reported some figures at this stage. There'll still be a tendency to sort of outer metropolitan and non-metropolitan booths in those figures. But we see a very different picture when we go south of the Murray. In Victoria, what we're seeing is a 0.1% swing to the Liberal Party. So basically no shift at all at this stage in Victoria, though again most of those figures are heavily dominated by votes from outside of Melbourne. And then when we cross back straight to Tasmania, there are no seats changing hands in Tasmania at this election. We've got a significant count there, and there's a 4.3% swing to the Labor Party, boosting Labor's hold on the state even further than it is now.
OK, now one of the most high-profile participants in this campaign, front and centre for the coalition, has been Joe Hockey, the Shadow Treasurer, and he's standing by in his Sydney seat of North Sydney. Joe Hockey, we're not going to worry too much about your numbers at this stage because everyone's going to assume you're back. But what is your feeling of what's going on right now?
Well, Kerry, I think quite obviously there's a swing in Queensland and New South Wales. I think our members have done a great job in Victoria and South Australia in sandbagging their seats, so our losses should be minimal there. Much will come down to Western Australia, I feel, and who knows how Solomon's going to go in the Northern Territory, but it's going to be a very long night, I think.
But it's interesting, you're obviously counting on and hoping for a swag of seats in Queensland and New South Wales, but I suppose it shows just how tough a task you've got, that you're counting it right down to individual seats like Solomon in the Territory and possibly one, maybe two, in Western Australia.
Well, that's right, Kerry. It was always going to be a seat-by-seat battle. The Labor Party moved a lot of resources into particular seats, like Herbert. They abandoned Leichhardt on Monday and moved resources into Herbert, trying to sandbag Herbert. They obviously focused on individual seats, and we've certainly been out-resourced by the Labor Party, there's no doubt about that. But I'm confident that the people of Australia will make the right decision.
Well, if you're confident that they are you... But in terms of your own observations as you've gone round this country and on what you've picked up already today, how well-based is your confidence?
Well, I'm very confident the people of Australia will make the right decision. I hope that they've made a decision our way. That's what I'm saying.
You're basing it on today.
Oh, look, Kerry, I've got a range of different sources of intelligence, even some of it from the Labor Party, I might add. Yeah. So it's very intriguing who rings you up if there's going to be a very close election result. But I would say to you that it has been a fantastic campaign from our perspective. It's been incredibly disciplined, very focused. We've been very open and honest with the Australian people, and the great Labor Party machine is quite obviously a failure. And whether they win or whether they lose, I think they'll tear themselves apart.
What is the most that you can hope for tonight? A majority of 1 or 2, maybe 3?
I suspect that's right. It'll be very, very close. If I was a betting man, I'd say the most likely result is some sort of hung parliament, but I'm not a betting man.
You're a hopeful man right now. Joe Hockey, thanks for taking the time to join us at this early in the night.
Thanks very much.
Okay, now Anthony.
Just to say, I'm looking at overall figures. At this stage, I've got Labor losing 6 seats to the Coalition. I've got the Coalition ahead in 13 other Labor seats, which brings you to 19. I've got Labor gaining 1 seat McEwen and ahead in Latrobe. So at this stage, there's a net shift to 17 seats. Now, that's still too close to call because some of those seats are doubtful. You don't give them away at this stage of the night. But that means at this stage, we'll be here for a long time yet.
Well, that's the magic number, Kerry, 17 seats. So, but I agree with Anthony. I think we're still, going to be a long night. But I must say, looking at that swing in Queensland of 5.8% on nearly 10% counted, I mean, we pick up, if it's uniform, we pick up 10 seats with an under 5% swing. So
that's the big if, isn't it?
That's the big if.
If it's uniform.
Yeah, if it's uniform. We just don't know that yet, and we won't know that for a while. But looking, McEwen is, I'm afraid, with the loss of Fran Bailey, and despite the good efforts of our candidate, one of those seats that's so line ball that I suspect it'll move to the Labor column, which means we have to win 18 elsewhere. But I do hope Jason can hang on in Latrobe. So.
Well, that's going to become enormously important, isn't it, Latrobe and hanging on to Corangamite?
Well, I think it's panning out pretty much as we expected. Swing against us in Queensland, still a bit early to see what the dimensions of that is, both in the macro but also, most importantly, on the ground. A smaller swing in New South Wales, but again the same consequence where it extends to. But also we're doing obviously better in Victoria, picking up. I think we will pick up McEwen, given Fran Bailey's departure. But picking up McEwen, the very early figures I saw from Latrobe were helpful, but nonetheless, too early. I think we'll hold Corangamite, and if we haven't seen any South Australian figures yet because they're half an hour behind. But if we could snatch a seat in South Australia, that would also be a very important buffer. I agree with Anthony. It's 5-0. It's 5-0 in Tasmania, so I think that's fine. But it is going to be what's the extent of the losses in Queensland, and can we make up in Victoria and possibly South Australia?
Well, let's take a look at some of those Victorian seats, and we'll start with the seat of Melbourne, where the Labor candidate is under threat from the Greens, and. We've spoken about this before, held by Lindsay Tanner. He's retired. Labor with a margin of 4.7%, 2.3% counted.
And we've got, on those figures, the Labor Party is on 947. Adam Bandt, the Greens are second. Last time they finished third and moved into second. But the primary vote, there's the problem for Labor, 41.4. Now, we're not doing any booth comparisons this electorate, so we're not sort of giving it away as quickly as we can in other seats. But that's a significant swing. The seat remains in doubt. That's only a very small sample of booths at this stage, and actually I think they're coming from rather good Labor areas as well, which won't be good news for the Labor Party.
Okay.
So at this stage, the Greens are ahead in that seat.
Okay, the seat of Latrobe, which could well turn out to be a vital seat for Labor to hold tonight or to take tonight. This is held by Jason Wood. He's held it since 2004 with a margin of 0.5%. We've got 10.7% of the vote counted.
And we've got Jason Smith on 4595. He's ahead. There's a lot of booths done around Narra Warren and that area. There's quite a smattering of booths there. Jason Wood's ahead. His primary vote's down 1%. The Labor primary vote's down 4%, but the Green vote is up 4%, and the Sex Party's got 2.3% there. 50.6% for Labor. A 1.1% swing for Labor. That seat's still in doubt. I've only got 2 preference counts in that booth. I think on the primary votes, those figures might be slightly better for Labor, but we'll have to wait for more counting in Latrobe.
Okay, we'll look at the seat of Chisholm in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. This is held for Labor by Anna Burke on a relatively safe margin of 7.4%, with 5.8% of the vote counted. It might still tell us a story of the swing.
Anna Burke's held it since winning it when Michael Wooldridge moved seat in 1998. She's held it since 1998, 48.7 to 35.8. The figure tightens up on preferences, and when you factor in the booths in that electorate, there's a swing of 2% to the Liberal Party, but Anna Burke will still go on to retain Chisholm.
Okay, we'll look at the seat of Dunkley. This is Melbourne southeast, down to Frankston. Held by Bruce Bilson for the Liberal Party since 1996 with a margin of 4%. But there is a bit of a swing on to Labor there with nearly 12% of the vote counted.
Yes, and this one's going to be interesting because we're going to need preferences. I've got 6 of 37 first preference vote booths. Labor's ahead. I've got a rod collection of booths there, which looks like a representative sample to me, and Labor's ahead on the primaries, which I wouldn't expect on the numbers I'm looking at. It's factoring into a 2.4% swing to Labor, but I haven't got a preference count on those numbers. That's not enough to defeat Bruce Bilson. I think at this stage we've got the Liberals ahead, but we're not giving the seat away.
OK, the seat of Deakin in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. Again, Mike Simon has held this since the last election for Labor on a margin of 1.4%, and we've got 6.5% counted there.
And Phil Baresi, the Liberal MP, former Liberal MP for the seat, 2336 to 42.7 to 40.8, nearly 12% there with the Greens, significantly. When we factor in what booth that information is from and make an estimate of preferences, what we come up with is a swing of 0.9%, and that is
to the Liberals.
To the Liberals. Not enough. That seat's still in doubt.
OK, but it's interesting that we're getting slightly different swings in different parts of Melbourne. We might, I know we've got Mike Kelly standing by, the sitting Labor member in Eden Monaro. We'll just take a very quick look at the figures in Eden Monaro first. This takes in Queanbeyan, down outside Canberra, down to the south coast of New South Wales. And with 5.4% of the vote counted. Anthony?
Well, we've got 20 of the 79 booths with first preferences, and on those numbers, Mike Kelly is ahead of David Gizzard from the Liberal Party. 11% there with the Greens, small numbers with other parties. When we factor in the 15 booths with preference counts, what we're seeing is a 1.1%. I'm not sure if I've got newer or older figures, but it's only a small swing. It's got Labor. We've got Labor retaining there. That looks like a pretty accurate prediction at this stage of the night. And that looks like Labor will hold on to Eden Monaro.
Well, Mike Kelly, we've got Anthony Green saying that he thinks you're going to keep your seat. But if you do, you're going against the trend in New South Wales. I wonder why.
Oh, g'day, Kerry. Well, I think, rural and regional seats really have big issues confronting them, issues to do with health. But in particular, in the last week and a half, I've seen this broadband issue really take off. The broadband issue is so important for us. It's something that will help us to overcome disadvantages in education, in health, and give our regional businesses a chance to compete on the world stage. And that was really starting to permeate right across the region in this last week and a half. But of course in Eden Monaro it's never much of a margin, and of course we'll have to wait for much later in the evening because booths vary so greatly in this region.
Well, it's going to be a nail-biter right across the country from the early indications, Mike, but we've got used to seeing Eden Monaro as a bellwether seat, the seat since 1972 that goes where the government goes, but there's a possibility you might be about to break the trend tonight.
Oh, look, I hope not, and I really don't think that will eventuate. It's just so critical what's at stake in this election. It's the difference, I think, in essence, between a government with imagination to put forward policy for the future of this country, leaning forward to a couple of decades rather than just election cycles. And I know this has been a hard ask to run that way, to present policy that is long-term, and that's been our biggest challenge. And perhaps we could have done things better in terms of communication, in terms of the way we roll out complicated policy, but there's just so much at stake. We've got a situation of a coalition led by a man who hasn't the knowledge or the imagination to understand what's at stake here in things like the National Broadband Network. So there's a lot at stake, and I really do hope the nation comes with Eden Monaro on this.
OK, well, Mike Kelly, thanks for taking the time at this stage of your evening, and we'll see what happens in the next hour or two. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm just thawing out. Actually, I'd like to put in a bid for no more winter campaigns if anybody wants to come to Eden Monaro and check it out.
You better speak to your Prime Minister.
Yeah, for sure.
I personally favour the non-daylight saving campaigns.
Well, it makes this job a little bit easier. Stephen Smith, you've got some new figures.
Nearly 9% counted in Robertson, a 1% swing towards us.
So this is Robertson in New South Wales Central Coast, which is a critical seat for you. You're on a very fine margin.
A critical seat, so that's good news. But again, still early.
Sorry, now just take me through that again. That figure.
A 1% swing to us in Robertson with nearly 9% counted. So 51% to us, two-party preferred.
Well, you start to take it seriously on 9%, don't you?
Well, I'm naturally cautious, as you know.
Yes, I do.
But I wouldn't have mentioned it if I didn't think it was encouraging. The worry for us is the swing in Queensland, particularly in Brisbane, does look like it's a big one. That's the worry. Meanwhile, in Victoria, I think we're doing well in McEwen. I think we'll win McEwen. Corangamite's a bit tighter than I would want it to be, and Latrobe, I think we have our nose in front, but both Corangamite and Latrobe too early.
Yeah,
I think Mike Kelly has won Eden Monaro. I think the test now is whether Eden Monaro remains the bellwether seat.
Yeah, I think this could be an election where Eden Monaro breaks its tradition and stays with the Labor Party, but they lose government. I think that's possible. Mike Kelly's established himself well there, despite David Gazzard being a very good Liberal candidate, because the anger and the real sentiment in New South Wales is in that Western Sydney and Central Coast area. It hasn't affected the Southern Highlands and the Southern Coast nearly as much. Kerry, I think one thing that is interesting is, with 12% counted nationally now, Labor is on its equal lowest primary vote since the war of 37.6%, a loss of nearly 6%. I mean, that's the phenomenon of tonight. I think we're going to see potentially the lowest
that's around
Labor primary vote.
That's around the Latham figure, isn't it?
That's right. It is bang on the Latham figure of 2004.
Yeah. Well, we might just look at the national figures now, take something of an overview, because that will tell its own story. We've got, as Nick said, 12.7% of the vote counted. Let's just look at how that breaks down in two-party preferred terms. We've got 49.2% to Labor, 50.8% to the Liberals, and that is a swing nationally away from Labor of 3.5%. Bearing in mind, we've got to see how that breaks down from place to place. But to get a better idea of how it is breaking down, let's cross to Lee Sales.
Thanks, Kerry, and good evening to viewers who might be joining us for the first time. It is early in the counting, obviously, but let's go over what we know so far and have a look at it in a little bit of closer detail. If we can start with the seats that have been won so far, the Labor Party has 51 seats. It looks like they may have lost 5. The Coalition has 49 seats. They've picked up 5. At this stage, the Greens don't have any seats in the House of Representatives. As I say, it is early in the evening, and we anticipate that there will be 3 independents in the House of Representatives. That's with about 13% of the vote counted. If we can take a look at how the primary vote is working out at this stage, if you have a look here, you'll see the Labor Party is sitting on 37.5% of the primary vote, the Coalition ahead on 44%, the Greens polling about 11%, and the minor parties and independents about 7.3% at this stage. In terms of the comparison to the 2007 election result, Labor has a 5.8% swing against it. There's a 1.7% swing to the Coalition. The Greens would be pleased to see a 3.6% swing going their way, and other minor parties and independents picking up 0.5%. How does the chamber look overall? If we take a look at our chamber graphic, we see the ALP on 51 seats with almost 13% of the vote counted, as I mentioned. The Liberal National Party Coalition on 49 seats. The Greens with no seats, and independents anticipating to have 3 seats, the same 3 seats that they had in the last Parliament. If we factor in also the seats likely, that means the seats that are generally very safely held by one party or the other. We would anticipate that the Labor Party has 63, the Coalition 57, the Greens none, and the independents remain on 3. Our main panel's already been going through some of the key seats in Queensland and New South Wales, where there's clearly a swing on to the Coalition. The question is, of course, how large it is. If we can take a look at some of the seats elsewhere on the eastern seaboard, the contest in Tasmania is in the northern marginal seats. The seat of Bass, for example, where the sitting member Jodie Campbell is retiring, it looks like there's going to be a 4.5% swing to the Labor Party, to the man who's succeeding her, Jeff Lyons. So with about a third of the vote counted in Bass, it looks like the Labor Party will be holding on to that seat. Braddon is another marginal Labor-held seat in Tasmania, which has been held by Sid Sidebottom for the past term of the Parliament. There's a 5% swing to the Labor Party there, again with about a third of the vote counted in Braddon, so Sid Sidebottom would be holding on to that for Labor. If we cross the Bass Strait and we head into Victoria, we'll take a look at the seat of Corangamite, which has been one of the most hotly contested seats in this election. It is too close to call at the moment. It's in doubt for Labor. About 30% counted. There's a tiny swing to the Liberal Party at this stage, to Sarah Henderson, who's a former lawyer and journalist, but it's really too close to call. But that would be something that would be worrying Labor. It's one of those seats that both parties want to have. So, Kerry, Labor holding solid in Tasmania, which they'd be happy with, but as I say, those early figures in Corangamite wouldn't be quite so encouraging for the ALP.
Well, this could get down to 1 or 2 seats tonight. We could even end up sweating on Western Australia. Anthony Green, what are you saying?
Well, I'm saying that at this stage, the Labor Party's definitely lost 6 seats, but only gained 1 in McEwen. They're also ahead in Latrobe. But there's another dozen or so seats where the Labor Party is currently trailing. And what's become interesting is the seats which we weren't expecting to see there. Labor is currently behind in Banks, they're currently behind in Greenway, and they're currently behind in Brisbane. And I don't think there's seats that people particularly had factored in as coalition wins.
Certainly not Banks.
No, Brisbane was on our list.
Watch list.
On our watch list. Yeah. Look, the extent of the swing in Brisbane and in Queensland and New South Wales is obviously worrying. Corangamite's too tight for comfort. Anthony's reference to Western Australia, I know you'll allow me to do this. It's only 5:30 in the West. In the West, people who haven't voted should think about the risk of Tony Abbott and go and vote Labor.
Well, we'll have to give Nick a 10-second response.
Well, the Western Australians should think very seriously about the mining tax which this government's about to impose on them and damage the Western Australian economy. They ought to think about that very carefully.
Righto, that'll be enough of the campaigning now.
Kerry, there's very early figures in South Australia. They are small, but they do show, as I had confidently predicted, a small swing to us in Sturt and a small swing against us in Boothby, but not enough to lose Boothby. So I think there will be a status quo result in South Australia, which in a sense is bad news for Labor. They really need to pick up a seat in South Australia, I think, if they're to be confident of retaining government.
I think it's probably a good time to make another point. Corangamite, for example, neck and neck, but we know from the Electoral Commission close of play yesterday there were nearly 20,000 pre and postal votes, so about 10,000 pre-polls and 8,000 postal votes. So
who are they going to vote?
So in Corangamite, as in I suspect a number of others, what we know tonight won't be enough.
But traditionally in the past, those pre-polls and postals have, I know it can vary, but they by and large.
Well, I think one of the features of this campaign is the very substantial increase in pre-poll and postal votes. That I think is one of the reasons I think we may not be able to call it tonight, because there's so many outstanding.
And I don't want to be pessimistic, but the distribution of postal votes came at probably the worst moment in the campaign for us.
Making excuses already, Stephen.
Well, it's a fact. It came after the terrible second week, the disastrous second week. The postal votes were distributed then, but that may well be balanced.
I'll come back later and get you to tell us exactly what you regarded as your disasters. But I'm going to continue the seat run and look at the seat of Robertson in New South Wales. This held by Labor, but the sitting member, as most people would know, Belinda Neal, has made a departure. And it's on a very fine margin of 0.1%. This is the New South Wales Central Coast. We've got 14% counted.
And we've got a preference counting quite a number of booths here. There's 50 booths in this electorate. So on the numbers we're seeing at the moment, we'll see a lot of counting to come in this electorate. Darren Jamieson ahead there on the first preference votes. There's quite a few votes from down around Pearl Bay, Tonga, Mount White, Mooney. 0.2% swing to the Liberal Party, which puts the Liberal Party just a smidgen ahead. So that seat remains in doubt. We don't know whether Deborah O'Neill or Darren Jamieson will be the next member for Robertson.
OK, Werriwa in Sydney's outer southwest. Many years ago, this was Gough Whitlam's seat. 17% of the vote counted. It's held, well...
let me explain.
I think we better let you explain this one, Anthony.
The seat of Lowe was abolished and John Murphy's contested Reid, which was held by Laurie Ferguson. Laurie Ferguson's contesting Werriwa, while the member for Werriwa, Chris Hayes, is contesting Fowler, where Julia Irwin is retiring. Musical chairs. Laurie Ferguson will go on to win Werriwa from the Liberal Party's Samascaros. Big vote there for the Greens. There's only 3 candidates, which is an unusually small number in an electorate like this, and we're seeing a swing of 7% to the Liberal Party. And if that's going on in Western Sydney, then there's a number of other seats where the Labor Party will be very concerned.
OK, the seat of Paterson in the New South Wales Hunter region. This is one where Labor constantly tries and more often than not fails to get back. Bob Baldwin has held this since 2001. He's on a margin of only 0.6%. Nearly 40% of the vote counted, and there's a swing to him.
No problem here for Bob Baldwin. There was talk, the Prime Minister made a quick visit up there the other day. This stage, we've got a substantial counting in this electorate, and Bob Baldwin, 49% on the first preference votes. When you factor in the booths that information is from, then Bob Baldwin goes on easily to win the electorate of Paterson. We've had a swing here of 4.4% to the Liberal Party, and Bob Baldwin, we will, in the moment, declare as the winner.
OK, we might also now take a look at the seat of Dobell. This was a seat that was in play for Labor. Craig Thompson is the member. Took it over at the last election on a margin of 3.9%. 29% of the vote counted.
This stage, there's not a lot happening in this electorate in terms of the swing we've seen in other seats. Craig Thompson is well ahead on the first preference votes. We've got preference counts in 18 of the 59 booths in this electorate. And on the figures we're seeing, there's a 0.7% swing to Labor, and Craig Thompson will easily retain Dobell.
OK, the seat of Page on the New South Wales North Coast. Labor took this at the last election, Janelle Saffin. With a margin of 2.4%, you've got nearly 32% of the vote counted, and a slight swing to Labor.
Last time we were talking about Cowper, where there was a substantial swing to the Nationals. Right next door in Page, probably the most rural of the North Coast electorates, Janelle Saffin for the Labor Party, who won it last time. She will easily win that seat. She's ahead on the first preference votes at this stage. We're factoring in preference counts in half the booths at this stage, and there's a 0.8% swing to Labor, so Janelle Saffin will hold on to Page for the Labor Party. OK, now we're going to jump back to Queensland and the seat of Bowman, because this seat was just about the most marginal Liberal seat held by Andrew Laming since 2004, but this has had a big swing. Yes, we've seen here Andrew Laming's well ahead there on the first preferences from Jenny Peters. The Greens with 9.9% there. Andrew Laming's leading on the first preference votes with a third of the first preference booths counted. When we look at the next graphic, which compares the preference counts we have in electorates, what we see is a swing of 8.9%, a complete reversal of the swing at the last election. And Andrew Laming, after his narrow squeak by only less than 200 votes last time, will be returned as the member for Bowman.
And Andrew Laming is very keen to claim victory, standing by with his wife, Alicia. Andrew Laming, you must be feeling a lot better than you did at this time in the last election. Understatement of the year.
Well, Kerry, no, you're always confident. Even 3 years ago we were, but that margin was 64 votes. It'll be a little larger tonight, thanks to an amazing campaign by Tony Abbott nationwide. And the LNP is here to stay, Kerry. This has been a fantastic result in my home state of Queensland.
So what do you isolate as, say, the one or two standout issues that have done this for you?
Well, look, these are nationwide issues. Every one of your viewers will know those. We've got a massive fishing vote down here, and I think, everyone knows you just utter the words Anna Bligh in Queensland and people do everything they can to vote for the other party.
So could you see the mood change in Queensland as the campaign progressed? Were there any pivotal moments in the campaign for you?
It's been extremely close. Each of the public debates were key moments, but I'd have to say Tony Abbott's 36 hours, he is an ultra marathoner, and he's shown right down to the wire that he's going to go for every possible Liberal coalition vote that he can, and it's been a fantastic finish of the campaign, Kerry. We set some basic objectives here. We wanted to make it a really confident win. We've used social media and e-media, Facebook, YouTube, everything to reach out to younger voters and keep them engaged, and I think the result will show that tonight.
OK, well, Andrew Laming, congratulations and thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Great, Kerry.
Sorry, I'm going to cross to Tony Jones in just a second, but Nick Minchin's got something to tell us.
I think Lindsay's worth looking at. There's nearly 20% counted in that classic Western Sydney seat, a seat that we need over 6% to win, and is showing a 7.7% swing to the Liberal Party, which would be an extraordinary gain in a fascinating seat. And just shows you the extent of the problem that Labor has in Western Sydney, and that would be a remarkable gain if we can pick that up.
And also the Liberals are still ahead in Greenway. And to avoid Daryl Mellon claiming that the ABC has lost all respect again, I'd just like to say that Daryl has pulled ahead again in Banks, but it's still a substantial swing in his electorate.
Okay, so that's just to come back to that. I mean, that's all. Even though it's a bigger swing, on paper it looked the toughest seat to win than others.
Well, that's right. It was sort of outside the target range.
But by the same token, it was always one that you were strongly hoping to get back.
Yeah, because there are seats like Page which have a lesser swing required, but we felt that probably more
there was
likely
a bit of a dirty tricks aspect last time, which I think might have added
well,
most to
that's
Labor.
true too, yeah.
But on the other side, Nick, the Labor Party has now pulled ahead in Aston, in Victoria.
Right. On what?
I've got preference counts in 6 booths.
Yeah,
it's not decided yet.
Yep.
But
you're right, Victoria could decide this election.
I've got Aston very close.
Yep.
And we've got Lindsay and Greenway were always on our watch list. Lindsay, good local member, but you saw the 25+% by-election swing at the state level. But Bradbury's done very well, but it's neck and neck. But that was always on our list, as was Greenway.
Okay, now we're going to take a very quick look at Herbert in North Queensland, based around Townsville, because we have Ewan Jones, the Liberal National candidate, standing by. Now, we had a popular Liberal member, Peter Lindsay, retiring at this election. This is a very, very tight seat, and we've got 30.5% of the vote counted. Anthony?
And what we're seeing here, Tony Mooney, the former mayor, famously lost the Mundingborough by-election many years ago. He's behind Ewan Jones as 45.29% for the Greens, just under 5% there with Family First. We've got a preference count in 14 of the 44 booths, and we're seeing a swing of 1.8% to the Liberal Party, which, given its narrow margins, means the Liberal Party would technically win that seat back, even though they currently have a sitting member. So that marks down as a Liberal Party gain.
Okay, and we've got Ewan Jones standing by. Ewan Jones, what's your read of what's happening in Herbert tonight?
Kerry, this is my very first campaign, so I'm just having an absolute ball with this. I don't know what to read. Our campaign team is busy running around and getting the numbers, but just having an absolute wonderful time.
What was your sense through the course of the campaign while you were having a wonderful time? What struck you as the issues that were resonating in Herbert?
Cost of living and the mining tax was a big one. The cost of living across all levels and dealing with governments on all levels. But the mining tax was a very, very big issue here, and the business is still very, very worried about what may happen in the future.
What about the defence vote?
I think the defence vote, Townsville's a great garrison city, and the defence vote, we don't really know how it goes, but I think we provided some good stuff with our promise that we will look after the DFRDB pensions. So we've come up with some good stuff for the defence, and we will look after the defence.
So, I mean, what are your scrutineers telling you right now? Are they telling you that you're in for a long night, or that you're going to know fairly soon? I mean, it is, at this stage, it's actually looking very positive for you.
Well, they're telling me it's very positive. We'd like to. Peter Lindsay's looking very, very worried, but a few other guys are patting me on the back and saying it's about time we opened a beer. But I don't know.
Well, you can open a beer, but don't have too many, because we might come back to you.
Thank you very much.
Ewan Jones, thanks for that.
Thanks, Kerry.
Now we're going to cross to Tony Jones, who has a Queensland Senator in George Brandis on his panel with Penny Wong. Tony?
Yeah, George Brandis, you better tell us what the Queensland story is from your point of view. I think last I looked at 5.8 or 5.9% swing to the coalition across the state, but give us a sense of how it's looking overall from your point of view.
Well, it's looking encouraging in Queensland. Of course, the problem with trying to apply uniform swings to Queensland is because of the very regional nature of the state. All those coastal seats in central and northern Queensland have their own dynamics, but 5.8% swing sounds about pretty much consistent with our expectations. I think I said earlier when we were speaking, Tony, that there was a palpable sense of movement away from the Labor Party in and around Brisbane in the last week, and that seems to be the case. I've got some up-to-date figures from Brisbane, which shows us with a 1.3% margin over the Labor Party with 19 of the 40 booths counted. That's consistent with about a 6% swing. Now, if on a 5.8% swing, if you applied it uniformly across the state, and as I've said, you can't necessarily do that, but for the sake of the exercise, a 5% swing in Queensland would see the coalition gain 10 seats from the Labor Party. Now, I'm not predicting that will happen, but that's the order of magnitude.
Let's hear from Penny Wong, and we heard Nick Minchin earlier talk about the tide in Queensland coming in for Labor under Kevin Rudd. Now it seems to be going right back out again. The question is, how far will it go out? And give us your sense, first of all, of Queensland, the situation you're in.
Well, obviously the results in Queensland are difficult for us so far. I mean, we have seen some pretty significant swings so far in the results coming in. Having said that, obviously there's still a lot of vote to count. I think George is right on this count, that obviously you get very substantial regional variations in Queensland. We've seen that already in some of the seats you've just put up. Significant difference, obviously, between the swing in Herbert, for example, and the swing that was up before in terms of Arch Bevis's seat of Brisbane. So it's we knew all along that Queensland was going to be a tough state for us. It often has been.
Did you know how tough New South Wales is going to be? Because we're now hearing a 7.7% swing in Lindsay, a seat you held by more than 6%. I mean, that's outer Western Sydney moving against you.
Oh, I think we always knew that those seats in Western Sydney were tough for Labor for a whole range of reasons. We've been campaigning pretty hard in those seats. Dave Bradbury and Lindsay's been campaigning very hard. Obviously, New South Wales, again, you've got some regional variation. You've got Page, which looks like Janelle will hold that seat, and I haven't seen many other results from some of the other seats, but Lindsay.
What do you put
Banks
this down to, though? Are we talking about Tony Abbott sort of basically winning back what were once called the Howard battlers and may now be called the Abbott battlers?
Oh, well, look, I'm sure people will for a long time talk about why certain things have happened in certain parts of Australia. I think certainly you'd have to say there is some impact from people's views about state governments. That's certainly, I think, something that we picked up on, and I'm sure Mr Abbott has picked it up as well from some of the things he's been saying. But we're still fighting in those seats, and we'll see whether or not we can hold sufficient of the ones in Western Sydney. I hope we can.
George Brandis, New South Wales. Now, you combine these two stories, New South Wales and Queensland, what do you get?
Well, you get a very unpredictable situation, and as I heard Nick Minchin say a moment ago, it may well be that Victoria decides this election. The Labor Party really had to claw back a few seats in Victoria and South Australia to offset the anticipated losses, in particular in Queensland and New South Wales. Now, the early mail from South Australia suggests that neither of our marginals in that state, Sturt and Boothby, will fall to Labor, although Boothby is not out of the woods for us yet. Victoria...
but you're feeling confident about Christopher Pyne in Sturt by the
I've always felt confident about Christopher Pyne. He's probably the best constituency member in the country, and in a city where all the opinion polls showed that there was a swing away from us, and where Newspoll, for example, this morning had a 3.6% swing away from us across South Australia. To get a swing to him in Sturt is quite a remarkable achievement.
Yep, Penny Wong, gives the South Australians perspective if you can, because if there's a status quo in South Australia, that's not going to help Labor at all, at a time when Queensland and New South Wales have been moving against you.
Well, look, obviously we were hopeful of trying to get some gains in South Australia. I think what we'll see in South Australia is a high Labor vote, a lot of it, unfortunately, in the seats which we already hold. And the swing to us may well be in seats that Labor already holds. The early mail obviously would suggest that Sturt will be tough for us to win. Boothby perhaps slightly remains more of a chance, but the early figures are not quite as positive for us as we would hope, but the night's still young. Annabelle's run a very good campaign in that seat, as has Rick Sarr in Sturt. So
we'll just go back to George Brandis briefly. You're getting late mail as we're talking. We'll come to you and then we'll disappear from us.
Well, just some further information about seats that really weren't in much in contention, Ryan and Wright, which I'm told the Liberal National Party is now claiming. I don't know if they've been allocated to you, but those were seats that, of course, we had some difficulties in each of those seats, but those are seats that I'm instructed to claim.
All right, well, we'll hear from Anthony Green on that shortly. Thanks to both of you.
And Anthony Green is instructed to bring us up to date on the big picture, which is now starting to become much more
well, in fact, I just got a message from our online people saying, can we turn on the prediction yet? And I said no. The figure I've got in the computer at the moment is saying Labor 75 seats, which is a dead heat. There's no WA figures yet. And there's a lot of seats. The bottom of frame at the moment is showing Labor on 63 and the LNP on 53, I think it is. That's because there's quite a number of seats the LNP are ahead in, or the Liberals and Nationals are ahead in, but haven't won.
We'll win at least 3 in the West. We'll win Freo, Perth and Brand.
It's the change that matters. It's the change that matters.
Oh, come on, let's get serious.
Kerry, I think it'd be worth looking at Solomon. With 7.3% of the vote counted in that Darwin seat, it shows a 2.1% swing to the Country Liberal Party and therefore a Liberal gain, which could be very important in the scheme of things. And in Boothby now with 6.3% counted, it's only a 0.9% swing to Labor, which means we'll retain that seat with relative comfort on that basis.
One of the Solomon booths is the Army Barracks.
True. Yeah, but 7.7 counted is.
So we'll be here for a long time tonight. Some of the seats like Greenway Labor is currently behind in. The difficulty of doing our booth comparison model, which we use on election night, is that there's been major redistributions in seats, and a seat like Greenway has been massively redistributed. And I've got 6 booths with the preference count, and you need to know which electorate they were in last time. So it'll be a while before we get a real figure on that sort of seat.
All right, well, we'll continue our seat run, and we're going to go back to Dawson in North Queensland. This is around Mackay and inland from there. James Bidgood was the ALP member. He's retired. It's marginally Labor, 2.6%. We've got 36% of the vote counted.
Yes, and we've got quite a sample of booths. There's 77 booths in this election. We've got 34 first preference booths, 18 with preference counts. George Christensen is still well ahead. The bigger urban booths don't come in till later in the evening, which may make a difference. But that's a 4.4% swing to the LNP, and George Christensen will go on to win the seat. There hasn't been a lot of change to the electoral boundaries in that seat. Oh, it's still saying in doubt. Yes, it's only likely. It's not definitely given away. It's not pushed it over the edge yet. So there's still a bit of hope there for the Labor Party candidate, but those figures are getting very close to giving it away to the LNP.
OK, the seat of Capricornia, based around Rockhampton on the central Queensland coast, which we haven't looked at yet tonight. Now, this is on paper a safe Labor seat. Kirsten Livermore has held it for Labor since 1998. We've got 25% of the vote counted.
But it is the biggest mining seat in Queensland.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing in Kirsten Livermore, we're going to win the seat, includes Rockhampton and lots of mining towns at the back of Rockhampton. Kirsten Livermore's well ahead on the first preference votes. When you look at the swing by booth, there's an 8.2% swing there. The Labor Party will hold Capricornia, but that's a substantial swing in the electorate. OK, the seat of Dixon in Brisbane's outer northern suburbs, and Peter Dutton, the Liberal member for Dixon, will be a happy chap tonight. The redistribution had given this marginally to Labor, but with 50% of the vote counted, he's back. Yeah, he's got no difficulty in the end. He's well ahead on the first preference votes there from Fiona McNamara, who he defeated last time. 11% for the Greens, which is not a bad vote for them in that part of Greater Brisbane. Swing of 6%, and so no difficulty at all for Peter Dutton being returned as the member for Dixon. OK, now the seat of Longman. This was another really interesting seat for a couple of reasons, but based around Caboolture, Bribie Island, so stretching up from the northern edge of Brisbane to the south of Sunshine Coast. 44% of the vote counted in a very marginal Labor seat held by John Sullivan. Yes, and what we're seeing here is Wyatt Roy is well ahead on these first preference votes. His first preference vote's down 1%, the Labor Party primary vote's down 9%. Now, I haven't got a lot of preference counts in this booth, only a small number have reported those, but they're indicating a 6% swing, but I would think that is correct based upon what I'm seeing in the shift in the primary votes. So Wyatt Roy, I haven't actually checked this. I think he would become the youngest MP ever elected.
That's right.
He'd be, yeah,
20. Yes, he'll be the youngest ever elected.
And this is the first time he's voted.
Indeed.
In a federal election.
Good to see the Liberal Party representing the youth vote.
Nick, have you got any more information? Any more?
No, I don't. I'm just trying to get the nationwide picture again just to see what's going on there. But so I don't have anything to add. I'm sorry.
There's a big swing on in Queensland, obviously, but there was a question mark about how well the coalition was prepared for this election in terms of having to deal with the two-party, the Liberal National merger. And that wasn't all beer and skittles, was it?
No, it certainly wasn't. I mean, I'm a supporter of the Liberal and National parties merging in principle, but the LNP was a difficult gestation, and campaigning for the first time in a federal election was always going to be an interesting issue, and there were issues with various candidates, and of course the issue in Ryan. We should have a look at Ryan, I suppose, and see what's happening there.
Yeah.
But so far so good. We're seeing pretty consistently a 6% swing to the Liberal Party. People raise doubts about Wyatt Roy, but I think he's going to win this seat, and from what I know of him, he's going to be a very effective young member. So really the Queensland result is looking very good for us.
Well, coming in at that age, not only would he be the youngest in history, but he might... I'm not going to be around, Nick, but if he's an effective member, he could set another record.
Well, just to say, if we win Hasluck in Western Australia, we'll have the Liberal Party will be responsible for the first Aboriginal elected to the House of Representatives, and now with Wyatt Roy, the youngest member ever elected to the House of Representatives, quite historic.
And the first Catholic Prime Minister, if you do all of those.
We won't go there.
Oh, why not?
Catholic Liberal.
Stephen, have you got anything fresh?
I think Anthony's earlier point that we may end up seeing this election tonight determined in the West is becoming more likely. I think if we can hold Hasluck and hold Swan, that would really relieve the pressure. I think, without naming them, I think we've clearly lost 6 or 7 seats. I think we're at risk in 10 or 11 more. That's getting us right to the brink of the real and notional seats. I think we picked up McEwen. I think we're in the hunt in Latrobe and Aston. But we could end up looking at how we go in Hasluck and Swan and Canning as being really crucial.
And you're not absolutely chock full of confidence about any of them, are you?
Well, on all the available evidence, you would proceed from a starting point that we would just fall below, but all of the internal and external polls essentially had them anywhere from 48-52 to 50-50. So, Alana McTiernan in Canning could snatch it given her standing as a local candidate. In Sharon Jackson, we've got the local member incumbency, and I think that will count. In Swan, we've run a very good campaign and got a good candidate, and I think we are in the hunt there. But those three may now end up being quite crucial to the overall complexion of the night. I still think that, given the pre-polls and postals, that there'll be a bit of work going on in the course of the week. With the pre-polls, we do have some of them counted tonight for the first time, but not all of them.
I just get the feeling that a person who'd wanted to be on the winning team would rather be in Nick Minchin's shoes right now than yours.
Well, I'm old-fashioned. I'd always be in Labor shoes.
Yes.
Well said.
There are those who just want to be with the winner. We'll continue the seat run, and we're going to look at Moreton in one of the Brisbane suburban seats. This is one in the inner southern suburbs. Held by Labor, Graham Perrott. He took it at the last election. Margin of 6%. We got 52% of the vote counted.
Yes, and at this stage, Graham Perrott is well ahead there on first preference votes. 16% for the Greens. That's quite a vote for Moreton. That's a very good result for the Greens. I haven't looked at this national figure for a while, but the Greens, 4.4% is the swing to the LNP in that electorate. We've got quite a good sample of booths there. On those figures, we've got the Labor Party ahead, Graham Perrott ahead. We're not giving the seat away yet. But at this stage, he's leaning towards victory, and that's only a little bit more counting. I think the computer will give that one away as well.
OK, the seat of Flynn, this is around Gladstone, was held by Chris Trevor for Labor on a margin of 2.2%. We've got 50% of the vote counted, and I think that seat's gone, isn't it?
Well, Flynn has a new member, Ken O'Dowd. You can see him there. He's well ahead on the first preference votes there. Quite a substantial vote there for Family First, actually 4.6. Not many Green votes in central Queensland by the look of it. Yes, when we factor in those booths, this is quite a diverse electorate. We've got 61 of 107 booths with preference counts, 6.5%. The LNP has gained that seat, and it has a new member in Ken O'Dowd.
OK, the seat of Gilmore on the New South Wales South Coast. Joanna Gash has held this for the Liberals since '96, but the Electoral Commission, with the redistribution, was threatening to take it away from her. On paper, a Labor seat on a margin of 0.4%, but she's back.
She's back, yeah, no difficulty there. Not quite as big a swing as some. I think this is the same poll that was in the Illawarra Mercury the other day. She got 51%. When we factor in the information from where the booths are from in that electorate, the swing is about 4% to the Liberal Party. Joanna Gash, that's noted down as a Liberal Party gain because that's a seat that's currently notionally Labor held. Joanna Gash is back in the Parliament.
OK, the seat of Macarthur, where Pat Farmer lost his endorsement for the Liberals, was there from 2001. The redistribution also on paper has given it to Labor with 0.5% margin. You've got 45% of the vote counted, but again, back to the Liberals.
Yes, and at this stage, what's costing Labor is the leakage of primary votes in this electorate. You can see there Russell Masson's got over 50% of the first preferences in that electorate. Just looking, when we factor in the booths that information is from, it's a 2.6% swing, which is enough to make it a Liberal Party gain. It is a notional Labor seat at this stage, but it does mean that Russell Matheson succeeds Pat Farmer as the Liberal MP for Macarthur if you just ignore the redistribution.
OK, we look at the seat of Lindsay, again around Penrith and Sydney's outer west. This was a kind of, this was seen as the seat that was typical of the Howard Battlers, who underpinned much of his 11 years in office. Labor picked this up at the last election on a margin of 6.3% for David Bradbury, 48% of the vote counted.
A lot of counting to come in this electorate. At this stage, we've got, let me see, Fiona Scott is ahead on the first preferences. Small vote there with Susie Wright from the Greens. There's 40 booths in this electorate. I've got preference counts in 13 of them. At this stage, there's a 6.9% swing on. That seat's in doubt. We're not giving that seat away. This stage, you'd rather be in the Liberal position than the Labor position in that electorate. But at this stage, as I said, we're not giving that seat away. But the Liberals are ahead.
Good time, Anthony, to take a look at the seats that are actually changing hands, huh?
Yep. I haven't had a look at this graphic yet tonight, but let's see what it looks like. We are giving the Labor Party a gain in McEwen. We're also giving the Liberal Party, Maxine McHugh has been defeated in Bennelong. Joanna Gash, that's a notional gain. Macquarie, Louise Marcus switches seat. Bonner, Ross Vasta returns to Parliament. Dixon, Peter Dutton overcomes the redistribution. In Flynn, Ken O'Dowd is the new LNP member for Flynn. Ford is an LNP gain. Bert Van Manen is the new member for Ford. And I think there's some more on the next page from memory. Yes, there are. We've got Herbert has been won by Ewan Jones, we saw earlier. Warren Enshue's back into Parliament after a massive swing in Leichhardt. And Wyatt Roy looks like being the youngest person ever elected to the House of Representatives in his electorate of Longman.
Have we just on Macquarie? Have we got booths in from the mountains?
Let me have a look.
And while you're looking, I've just heard that there's been a mix-up of some sort involving the first 100 votes being counted in McEwen in Victoria. We're just waiting to get more information on it, but there's been apparently some sort of a mix-up. Whether it becomes significant to the outcome is another matter.
Kerry Greenway's another line ball seat in Western Sydney with 10% counted. It's showing a 5.6% swing to us, and we need 5.7 to win it. So that's going to be a line ball seat all night. I think Greenway.
Labor's back in front, just back in front.
Greenway and Lindsay, I think, are both going to go down the wire.
Yeah. This is exactly as we've all predicted, isn't it?
Indeed,
that it was going to be swinging all over the place, that the patterns were going to take time to emerge. Again, it reminds me of the South Australian election, Nick, because it was very much like that on the night.
That's right, with a huge variation in swings and seats, potentially going both ways. I think I've been worried that Victoria is going to be the decider, and at this stage we have 3 seats at risk there, which means we have to win 20 everywhere else. to be confident of winning government. So it's still very much in the.
I think it's much tighter for us than it was for Mike Rann, even on the night. You know,
You're more nervous than Mike Rann was, huh?
Can I raise an important point? Informal votes 5.6%. 6.6 in New South Wales.
Is this the Mark Latham effect?
I don't know. We won't know until afterwards. But
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
That's the highest informal vote since '84 at this stage. And last time there was an increase in the informal vote, which was 2000. It was an increase in the blank votes when Mark Latham was Labor leader. So what you do tend to see in recent years is there does seem to be this increase in informal voting when people are unhappy.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, it's now, I think, into can we pick up, how many seats can we pick up in Victoria? McEwen, I think, is ours. Aston and Latrobe, we're in the hunt there.
Do you want me to do them or what?
But too early.
And you've got to hope, like Billio, that you hang on to Corangamite too.
And Corangamite. And then it's the outlying states and territories. Solomon will be crucial. And then how we go in the west. Can we hang on to Hasluck? Can we pick up the notional Swan seat? Can we jag a Canning?
Now, the odds in the end start to favour the other side, Stephen, when you start looking at all of those ifs and buts. You're in a very precarious position right now, Labor.
I've been in tighter spots.
When? I'll let you think on that. I'll come back to you.
01, 04.
Was there something interesting on that phone call?
Well, with 17.3% counted in Boothby, it's absolutely line ball. It's 50-50. So that's going to be, like the Victorian seats, a seat to watch and could be critical at the end of the day.
Sweaty palms, anyone?
We early on, there was a chance that we might, cause Chris Pine some grief in Sturt, but he's bounced back. So, we essentially discounted any prospect of that some time ago. But we always thought Boothby was a prospect for us, that we were potentially in the hunt. So that one will end up in the same ballpark as Latrobe, Aston, etc.
If just come back for a minute to the hung parliament situation, Nick, you can't actually count, even though the three independents from the old parliament are all from a Conservative background, essentially a National Party background. You can't count on them automatically, can you?
No, we certainly can't. I mean, I hope we're not in hung parliament territory, but we can't assume that. And Tony Windsor has already said his inclination would be to go with the party with the plurality of seats, with more seats and more of the vote. And then there's the question of whether all three do go together or whether they break away, and who's likely to be the leader of that. So we certainly don't assume that. It means that we need, if it gets to that point, we need to have more seats than Labor to have any confidence that the three Conservative independents would support us.
I've now got a definite loss of 13 Labor seats and a gain of 1. So that's 12, which gets Labor to 76. Now, the predictions I've got on, I've still got Labor with a 2-seat majority before WA comes in. Yep. If they lose a seat or 2 in WA, it's a hung parliament.
What are your 12, Anthony?
Brisbane, Macquarie in New South Wales, Macarthur in New South Wales, Herbert in Queensland, Longman in Queensland, Bonner in Queensland, Dawson in Queensland, Ford in Queensland, Gilmore in New South Wales, Flynn in Queensland, Bennelong in New South Wales, Dixon in Queensland, and Leichhardt in Queensland. And I've got McEwen as a gain. And at this stage, doubtful seats. Come on. Here it comes. No. I'll look at the other screen. No, here it comes. This is important. Boothby, Labor is ahead. Latrobe, Labor is ahead. Aston, the Liberals are ahead, so that one's come back to the other side of the pendulum.
By much?
50.1. Counting all night on that one. Solomon, the CLP's ahead, but it's not been given away. And the Melbourne looks like the Greens are on track to win.
Okay. And I keep saying it, but Corangamite continues to be
Labor's
important
ahead.
as well. Labor's ahead.
Labor's ahead in Corangamite. Labor is further ahead in Robertson.
What other Corangamite?
Labor's ahead in Greenway again.
So Labor's further ahead in Robertson.
They're on 51 at the moment in Robertson, Labor.
Okay, well, look, we're going to take... this is giving you an idea of these very confusing patterns around the country. We'll take a look at the national swing to get some sense. We've got 42% of the vote counted. and you're seeing a swing of 2.8% away from Labor there, which has Labor on 49.9%, the Coalition on 50.1%. To make more sense of that, we're going to cross to Lee Sales.